Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Excellencies. Welcome to the first plenary session of the forum. During the session, experts from companies and Kazakhstan officials will provide a 360-degree overview of the mining and metals industry. The mining and metallurgical industry is a crucial part of Kazakhstan's economy, and we want to hear your thoughts on its future. We invite you to participate in a survey to assess the industry's growth, challenges, and opportunities. The survey consists of several questions covering topics such as the growth forecast for the mining industry, the prospects for different mining segments, and the key factors impacting the industry's development, both positively and negatively. At the end of the session, we are planning to present the results of the survey, and will also include them in the forum's report, which will be shared with policymakers, industry leaders, and media. Your participation is completely voluntary, and your responses will be kept confidential. Please scan the QR code survey and help us to better understand the mining and metallurgical industry's current state and future potential in Kazakhstan.
Dear delegates of the forum, first of all, allow me on behalf of all participants of this forum express my gratitude to Artur Polikov's team, the company Atlantics. This is quite a big event to be organized, and this is 14th time we are gathering here. Last year we were here, we were in London, MINEX Eurasia in autumn, and this is Kazakhstan, and all of the participants are participating in Kazakhstan in MINEX forum. We see the interest from investor side, both potential who are interested in Kazakhstan as the new direction and new exploration field, and current platform for the exchange of opinions, expertise, and knowledge. During our session, we are going to have a QR code displayed, which you could scan and vote on the issues of the organizers of the forum decided to discuss, and to know the opinion of participants of this conference. And in parallel, we are going to conduct the work of our first plenary session, which is dedicated to the drivers of the metallurgy industry, development of the metallurgy industry in Kazakhstan. We have very interesting panel speakers. We have Benjamin Golden, Prism, political risk management CEO. Benjamin has very good experience working in Kazakhstan, Central Asia, Caucasus, and also Chirag Shet, metal focus advising consultant, and he is the chief of the Indian direction. Nikolai Vladimirovich Rustovets, more than 90 years, he's the head of the biggest Republican Association of Mining and Metallurgical Enterprises. Has significant amount of experience working for government, for public services. Ruslan Rashid-Paymyshev. Since 2019 till 2022, he was the head of the Ministry of Industry Infrastructure, and he was coordinating the mining industry, and has mining and metallurgy industry in Kazakhstan, has very good experience, and he was the head of the Chamber of Mines. Bakhtaman Gildievich, head and chair of the board, Tauken Samruk. Bakhtaman Gildievich has huge experience working with uranium, Kazatomprom, and other projects with the participation of Canadian investors as well as other foreign investors. I would like to structure our session in a way that we will have 15 minutes for each presentation. We will limit 12 minutes, I guess, for the presentation, so that 3 minutes we will reserve for Q&A. First of all, I would like to give a floor to Benjamin Goodwin on the Kazakhstan risk management. Thank you, Almat.
It's a real pleasure to be here this morning. Thank you to Artur, and thank you for you all being here. My name is Ben Godwin. I'm a partner at Prism Political Risk Analysis. We're a London-based consultancy firm. We advise investors on issues such as political risk, the policy and regulatory environment. We do deal advisory work, particularly around due diligence, around transactions, and also help in terms of raising funds as well. And we do work with investors on disputes. I myself lived here in Astana for 7 years. I know Kazakhstan pretty well. And so really I thought that perhaps my role today, given the high amount of specialization that we have on stage today and throughout the next 2 days, is to give a sense of the overall global picture of where Kazakhstan is, where the metals and mining industry is at the moment, and what are the key issues that are probably going to be key topics of discussion over the next 2 days. So I'll get straight into it. If we could have the first slide, please. Can we move the slides? Or, yeah, thank you. So, thanks, Ahmed. So first things first, Kazakhstan has set itself out a very impressive growth goal for the next 5 years. The president set out last year that he wishes to double GDP of the country by the end of his presidential term, 2029. That is an extremely ambitious goal in any times, but as you will know, we are in a sort of a period of very high global uncertainty. Clearly we have geopolitical tensions around the world, and we also have a global slowdown in both economic growth, particularly China is the obvious example here, but also a global slowdown in foreign direct investment. It's getting harder to attract foreign direct investment. There's less of it around. And so I come from the UK. Kazakhstan has growth of between 4 and 5%. I'm extremely envious of Kazakhstan's growth, but the government has correctly identified that given the population growth of Kazakhstan, given the fact that Kazakhstan is a middle-income country and it needs to break through that middle-income gap, a lot of work needs to be done to make sure that growth continues for Kazakhstan, and that growth is equitable. Here in Astana, I was in Almaty yesterday. Kazakhstan's extraordinary growth is extremely visible, but there are other areas of the countries where maybe that growth isn't exactly shared, and the government has correctly identified that. So if we just move to the next slide. Some of the things that are sort of framing the government's thinking, and if you read the 2029 strategy, it's not very long, I recommend you have a look. I already mentioned that foreign investment has been slowing. Kazakhstan, sad to say, sort of since about 2013, 2014, the end of the commodity cycles, has experienced quite a precipitated slowdown in foreign direct investment. There was a big spike in 2016, but many of you will understand that that comes from the investment for the Chevron Tengiz Future Growth Project. But other than that, there has been a decline. The new administration under the new president has started to correct that decline, but there's a lot more work that needs to be done. And it's not just foreign direct investment. The government has identified that local investment, the local private sector is not investing as actively as it could be. And the government spending has moved from a sort of investment approach to more of a operational spending approach, clearly because of COVID, because of the economic dislocations, of the geopolitical tensions we see in the region, and now, unfortunately, because of the tragedy that is unfolding across the country with the floods. The government is spending an awful lot of money on anti-crisis measures, and that has resulted in a slowdown of government investment into capital projects and infrastructure. This has also led to government debt to increase quite dramatically, to more than double in the last 10 years. Now, again, coming from the UK, a debt to GDP of less than 25% seems extraordinarily positive. Absolutely correct. We're not worried about sovereign risk in Kazakhstan. But the government has correctly identified that given the wealth of Kazakhstan, given the growth that Kazakhstan is enjoying and the growth that it wants to accelerate, perhaps the country's fiscal position should not be in this position. And again, the government is working to reverse that. We also see a continued and perhaps even growing dependence on revenue from natural resources, particularly oil, of course. But we also see it in the mineral sector. And so there has been a growth of financing rather than from raising taxes, but growth financing to the budget from the National Oil Fund, which obviously cannot continue forever. If we could move to the next slide. How does this impact the metals and mining sector? I think it's just important to point out quickly how important this sector is to the economy of Kazakhstan. 80% of Kazakhstan's exports, more or less, largely come from natural resource exports, raw material exports. Obviously, hydrocarbons are a large part of this, but metals is about 15% of that. It's a really important part of Kazakhstan's current account balance position, a really important part of the budget. But Kazakhstan has rightly identified, and I think this is something that we'll be talking about a lot today, that Kazakhstan needs to move up the value chain. We need to move this country from going from purely exporting raw materials to developing secondary industries within Kazakhstan. And I think everyone here in this room recognizes that and understands that that's a very important ambition. If we're going to increase GDP per capita, if we're going to make sure that the regions of this country develop as quickly as Astana and Almaty and some of the other cities, we need to see that happen. The government has also pointed out that it rapidly needs new investment. So the figures I have here are from the government. The production of metals rapidly outpaces the discovery and confirmation of new reserves. And we're moving to a point where some of Kazakhstan's core metals production will be moving rapidly into decline over the next 10, 20 years. And as was pointed out earlier, if you're talking about 10, 15, 20 years to develop new resources, we really need to get our move on as soon as possible. It's clear there's also a number of reserves that are ready to go and ready to move into production that are not moving into production at the moment. And so Kazakhstan does need to think about what can be done to encourage those assets to move into production. Next slide, please. I think it's also important to point out, if we're having a discussion about regulatory change, about the regulatory environment, the policy environment, I think it is important to understand the difficult balance that the government of Kazakhstan has. And sometimes, certainly I represent clients that are investors that would like to see more deregulation, more privatization, fiscal incentives. That's all extremely welcome, but we also have to understand the challenges and the pressures that the government of Kazakhstan faces when reforming the economy, and really think about, as an industry, how can we align ourselves with Kazakhstan's own goals and the pressures that it's facing. So Kazakhstan has set out quite a broad program of deregulation. We've talked about things like digitization, anti-monopoly reform, but particularly price reform, and removing price controls across the economy is really important. And that is going to stimulate investment, but the government also has to contend with the challenges that produces. So inflation, supporting households, when you remove these kind of price controls. Privatization, we saw the IPO of Air Astana earlier this year, very welcome. But the government also has a duty to its people to maintain employment and maintain welfare. The same with fiscal measures. The government wants to introduce fiscal measures that will support investment, that will encourage investment, encourage the development of secondary industries. But as I pointed out earlier, there is a serious amount of pressure on the budget, which is now only increasing, unfortunately, because of this tragedy that is unfolding as we speak. And then, of course, there's the issue of industrial policy. We have a new law on industrial policy passed a few years ago. Again, everybody supports the idea of increasing the value add across the economy, but where does that go from increasing that value add into picking winners, or does that impact, for example, promote one industry at the benefit of another industry? And so, just as a final slide, if we can have the final slide, please. I won't go into too much detail about the positive momentum on reforms. Artur and the ambassador laid that out really well, but obviously it begins with the subsoil code, the adoption of this West Australian model, and there's an awful lot that's happening at the moment. And certainly, you know, I've probably been coming to MINEX since about 2009, 2010, in one capacity or another. And the level of interest that I've seen in Kazakhstan over the last few years, since 2017, 2018, is precipitously higher, and that should be welcomed. But, you know, as has been mentioned already, there is concern about supply mandates, about export controls. How will that create distortions within the market? Will that lower the investment potential of Kazakhstan for foreign investors? There's continued discussion about the mineral extraction tax. Will there be more changes to the tax? How is that tax going to be calculated? What further measures can be introduced to create more security for investors that are securing licenses? And other issues around industrial policy, around offtake contracts, and other issues to develop local content. Again, everybody supports the development of local content, but there are certainly models across the world where that has been successful and models where it has been unsuccessful. And so we should certainly be thinking about that. I'll hand back to Almat, but please come to me if you have any questions. Always happy to talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Benjamin. Any questions from the audience? Well, Benjamin, just one question from my side. I noticed that you touched quite important topic related to industrial policy, and it's also applicable to Kazakhstan, since it seems that now industrial policy is becoming integral part of Kazakhstan regulatory policy with regards to miners, and of course it's to some extent affects explorers as well. And the question is, I'm just wondering whether you have any studies on the countries that have implemented similar measures which now Kazakhstan is trying to implement, like as you mentioned, export control and similar other measures. And if yes, did these measures help those countries to improve or to ensure deeper processing of their solid minerals?
Yeah, there are quite a few examples around the world. Indonesia is an interesting example. It's long had different types of industrial policy, but in 2014, for example, it introduced export controls on, I think, nickel and bauxite, and production of these minerals collapsed. And so ultimately, export controls didn't help the mining industry, but it also didn't help the refining and processing industry that the measure was originally designed to benefit. And when that export control was removed in 2017, production within 1 year bounced back to what it was before 2014, and then went on to far exceed production of 2014. So that's kind of a sort of backwards example, but Indonesia has done other measures, such as constructing infrastructure, building clusters, and these economic corridors. So a lot of supply-side reform, which allows essentially, business people like doing business. They like investing money. They like making money. The trick is to try and just create the conditions that allow them to do the rest. Australia is a good example, but maybe Chile. Chile is 30% of the world's production of copper. It has a big state-owned enterprise that's part of that's part of Chile's mining story, and it has a very active industrial policy. So in many ways, it's quite similar to Kazakhstan in that respect, but it has done it through measures that are sort of small direct interventions to support a particular part of an industry, be it a supply chain, be it secondary processing and manufacturing, rather than, say, introducing export controls, which you're effectively asking miners to subsidize a processing industry, which may work for a couple of years, but it ultimately results in what you see like in Indonesia, where production falls.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Ben. I hope we'll allocate like last 10-15 minutes of this session to follow up further with this discussion. And I would like to give next word to Mr. Chirag Shet, who is principal consultant at South and East Asia, and the presentation is about global gold outlook. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. It's been a pleasure to be here and talking on the global gold market at the MINEX forum. We are a London-based precious metals consultancy. We are a global consultancy having offices in more than 9 countries. We work with mining companies, refineries, jewelry companies, help them expand their business, source metal, get investment. We are also the official data providers to the World Gold Council, to the Silver Institute. So all the global numbers that you see on gold, silver, platinum, palladium is actually provided by us. If I could just have the slide, please. Next slide, please. So, last few months has seen very interesting times in the global gold market. You've seen record high prices in dollar terms, but also gold prices have touched record highs in multiple currencies. Now, this is coming on the back of a broad-based rally across asset classes. Actually, very rarely in last probably 15 years, we've seen gold prices go up, silver prices go up, commodities go up, equities go up, and even dollar is going up. So this is coming in the back of huge amount of money flowing into all risky assets. And this is despite the growing geopolitical concerns across the world. If you could move to the second slide. What it is also doing is it is breaking down some of the old correlations that existed. So we've all, as students of economics, we've always been taught that when bond yields go up or when dollar goes up, gold prices should ideally go down. But you are seeing a situation where all these things are put aside and there is a broad-based rally coming in. Now, what is leading to this? So there are a couple of answers to that, and if you could move to the next slide, there is one which we believe is the big one. So it's been said that the central banks are buying. It's been said that a lot of money in gold is coming through the ultra-high net worth individuals. But what's also happening is, next slide please. What's also happening is there is a growing risk of stagflation. Now, if you look at this chart, the blue line essentially is on 5-year break-even inflation. So over the next 5 years, how does the world see inflation moving in? The white line is an economic surprise index. So consistently over the last 3 to 4 months, most of the economic data which are coming out are actually surprising on the downside. So you have a perfect storm which is getting built up where inflation is remaining sticky, where economic concerns are growing, and that essentially means high inflation, low growth leads to stagflation. And whenever we've seen historically there is a case of stagflation increases, gold prices and especially risk-free assets tend to see prices move up. Moving from macroeconomics, let's look at what is happening on the demand and the supply side. If we could move to the next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yeah. Globally, for last 2023 was a very good year for the gold market. You had roughly about 3,600 tons of gold mined and about 1,000 tons of gold coming in through secondary supply. For 2024, we expect similar trend. If we move to the next slide, I'll show you, where the production increase have come in. In 2023, we saw fairly decent increase in gold production from Canada, from China, from Russia, from South Africa. For 2024, next slide please, we expect the North American region to provide about 54 tons of additional supply. Central and South America will provide another 37 tons, followed by Asia. The CIS and Europe are two regions where we expect minor drop in production. Next slide, please. If you look at the all-in sustaining cost for gold, at this moment it is roughly about $1,300 per ounce, which means nearly 95% of the gold that is produced currently is profitable. And with gold prices now moving by another $200, $300 in last 2 to 3 months' time, you are talking about nearly 96 to 97 percentile of all gold that is produced is profitable globally. Next slide, please. Very interestingly, we have not seen negative reaction in demand to the price. So despite very elevated prices in 2023, the jewelry market has done very well. For 2024 as well, we expect jewelry market to do extremely well, very resilient to the higher gold prices. Next slide, please. I think what has essentially changed in the gold market is central banks. Central banks in last 2 years have bought record gold. We've moved from nearly 500 to 700 tons of gold buying to nearly consistent 2 years of 1,000 tons of gold buying. And if you look at the next slide, it will show you how central banks are now the second largest buyers of gold in the world. So earlier, if you looked at 2017 to 2021, 53% of the demand came from jewelry and only 12% of the demand came from central bank. But actually, if you look at 22 and 23, the central bank demand has moved from 12% to 23%, which now clearly shows that central banks, after individual buyers, are the biggest drivers of gold demand globally. Now, why is it happening? What is leading to this massive spree of buying by central banks? And mind you, central banks across the world are actually buying gold. It's not restricted to one region. The next slide will show you, this. So what is happening is that most of the central banks are looking at moving away from US dollar denominated assets to other assets. So actually, if you look at this chart, 20 years ago, about 65% of all assets that central bank held was in dollars. That has now come down to 59%. Whereas if you look at others, have moved from roughly 2 to 3% to 11%. Now, a large part of this others is gold. More and more central banks are actually storing their FX reserves in gold to hedge against volatility in dollar, but also the growing geopolitical risk. Moving on. If we move to the next slide, please. What's very interesting is that, you would think that a lot of investors would move, start booking profits at these higher prices. In fact, it's on the contrary, that there is growing physical demand for gold. In fact, I was speaking to some of my friends in Thailand, Indonesia, India. We've seen a consistent growth in demand, especially investment demand, despite such high record gold prices. Lastly, if you actually, next slide please. If you look at, what's happened in the gold market, yes, this quarter, last quarter, we've seen very high prices. While a lot of positives have already been factored in, we believe that ideally gold prices in the short term could see a correction once the geopolitical situation eases. We could easily see a $200 to $300 fall in gold prices. However, structurally, gold remains in a very positive framework. Fundamentals for gold market and silver market remains fairly positive, and whatever corrections that we could see could actually be short-term in nature. So that's it from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Chirag. And for example, in Kazakhstan, our government exercises its priority purchase right more than 5 years, I think, already. And I noticed that there's our neighbors like Uzbekistan increased their production, mining of gold, and it most probably means that they discover new gold reserves as well. And for Kazakhstan, I think the number one topic now is replenishment of gold reserves. So we need to explore more than we mine every year, and this is the main topic of I think Kazakhstan government's agenda for today. But let's follow up with this further discussion during our Q&A session. But
Sure.
And я хотел бы предоставить следующее слово.
I would like to give a floor to Nikolai Vladimirovich, to you. And your association that you are head of is actively involved into hot debate with governments, with other stakeholders and other persons. Nikolai Vladimirovich will open up the key directions for the development of the mining and metallurgical industry in Kazakhstan. Dear colleagues, dear participants of this forum, we are annually gathering here in order to exchange our opinions, experience and knowledge. I would like to elaborate on key directions because we see that the number of metals we have physical volume of the production and sales are declining in 2023, declined in 2023. One of the reasons is the logistics due to some countries' activity, and the key thesis is that the mineral base or the deposits are getting worse, and focusing on some of the issues we need to identify. Every year we're exchanging opinions, but now we need real help and assistance because a number of issues that I'm going to voice are actually dedicated to the development of the economical module. So the first one is the mineral deposit, or nowadays we are developing the tax code that we are, and our platform on the tax code is actually focused on that all taxations and all of the expenditures due to relevant to the contracts or any kind of types of the contracts will be taken into consideration. And for the earth minerals, we're also going to take into consideration the deduction of costs, exploration costs. We need to take it into consideration because tax services are not taking it into consideration. And regarding VAT on exploration costs, we need to ensure the return of excess VAT on exploration costs, regardless of exploration results and the availability of exports of solid minerals processed products. What I'm trying to say that government nowadays cannot allocate some budgeting or some funds in order to conduct the geological exploration. So that is why we have a project of amendments into the law and tax code, which will allow us to provide full compliance of all requirements that are international. The second thing, in Kazakhstan, we have huge amount of man-made mineral formations in the processing, which we are only processing 11% in the volumes that are formed annually, and we have average growth. So that is why association is posing an issue that we need to solve this issue not only with administrative involvement, but first foremost, we need to have tax evasion rules. So if we are going to give some tax reliefs, we're going to have the processing which is not fair. So that is why if the subsoil users are owning the lands and deposits, they are responsible. So solid waste belonging to the subsoil user and not considered subsoil according to the subsoil code should be regulated exclusively within the framework of environmental legislation. They should not be subject to mineral extraction tax, and no fee should be charged for their redisposal after processing. In relation to solid minerals owned by the state and according to the subsoil code, which are part of the subsoil, the extraction of solid minerals must be carried out in the prescribed manner. It is necessary to use reduced mineral extraction tax rate in order to stimulate their processing. We need integrated approach that will generally satisfy the needs of domestic commodity producers as well as mitigate risks for the procurement of subsoil users. In particular, we are going to formulate the issues on the processing, because nowadays we are discussing through Parliament. We are going to make amendments through the Parliament in regards to the export of the metals. If there are no, the patent will not be issued if the demand, the local demand will not be covered. And according to many metals, we don't have the full coverage. It's not only our aim, it is also the aim of the government for the for the processing. So we have to have high-tech processing. We as a government shall carry out this, or the private sector shall be involved into this. And we might have quite a range of the assortments in processing. And if the stimulation it is necessary in a high-tech processing, I think the the tax tariff should be decreased. And this issue is nowadays discussed in the government and in a key ministry. We have a position of that creating the mechanism of licensing. It should be quite simple in online, and it shall not pose problems for the export. So that is why it will be connected to the duration of the contract. I think we are finding the common understanding in the profile ministry, but we have to track and use the practice of other countries and see the best practices where the processing in domestic processing is appreciated, because we are right now on the crossroads. And another issue is the value. So everything what we are procuring now, we are in. So there are incentives, but mostly those incentives are administrative, has administrative character, and has some sort of penalty if we're not procuring something that is produced in Kazakhstan. So we think we need some balance. Soon we're going together with the manufacturers in Kazakhstan, and we're going to pose issues on the producing of the products. So the list of the products that could be manufactured in Kazakhstan are going to be formed. And we think that there should be standard conditions. I think Kazakhstan is a very prospective country, but there is a moment where we need to do reforms. We need to conduct reforms. We have understanding of what we should do, What shall we do? And it is important that tax code that is under the revision would take into consideration all of our wishes. We hope for our cooperation. I think we will have lots of contacts. We need fresh ideas, fresh proposals. In any case, we are full of positive attitude, and despite that, we have quite a difficult conditions on logistics. We have social payments that are growing, the salary is growing, and it is natural. We are ready to be competitive
and to achieve the essential growth that the head of the government has established. Thank you. Thank you, Nikolai Vladimirovich, for such a comprehensive review, detailed review of the significant questions that are faced in front of the industry. So are there any questions? If no, then I would like to ask a question, to pose a question. So your opinion is interesting. When it comes to the limitation of the export and licensing of the export, this is some sort of administrative way of the decision, how to solve this deeper processing. And as you've offered, this flexible rate of this minor mineral extraction tax, or maybe VAT in future, if these amendments are going to be signed by the president, is there a chance in future when we deal with the tax policy to replace this administrative decision to the stimulated measure? And for today, we are going to exchange our opinions about that, because I think that it's we have some kind of doubts. We have some kind of doubts on the idea that the internal processing of metals, that's the idea that should require the licensing when the internal necessities are not closed. But if the internal needs of our company are being covered in a full manner, should it be licensed as a barrier? I think we should be very careful here, and this platform, platform of MMI, we will try to prove and convince and really hope and rely on your competent piece of advice. And I think that this mechanism of licensing, it's not the best that was created in the world practice. What we offer to use the contracts that we have the free will to agree with, and if it doesn't work, only in this situation we need to apply licensing. Though I do understand that the government has such a wish to start this licensing mechanism and then just to see what we're gonna do. But believe me, now when we, let's say, have serious problems, even with keeping the volumes of the production, we need to have very slight and sensitive and predictable measures of regulating. So I think that we need to discuss this topic with the government many times, and I see that they listen to us. We need the arguments, and we will provide and present these arguments. Thank you so much. Now, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Ruslan Baymyshev. At the moment, he is the president of the Chamber of Mines that unites large investors, a very young but active platform association that touches very sensitive questions of the industry. Good morning, distinguished colleagues. I'm very happy to welcome you at this traditional 14th Mining Exploration Forum. It's an annual platform that collects together all the stakeholders that are interested in development of the geological and prospecting issues. Thank you so much for this wonderful practice. Despite the fact of all these difficulties and obstacles and challenges, this forum is still alive. Before I get to my presentation, I wanted to mention that in February, within the frameworks of our Kazakhstan Mining Chamber, we had a conference where we discussed the questions of the investment climate and investment attractiveness of Kazakhstan. We had great support from the side of the Ministry of Industry and Construction. We were supported by the Embassy of Great Britain, the United States, Canada, and we could discuss the questions that really were interesting for us. We got the answers. We didn't agree with all the answers, but we had 2 hours discussion session with stakeholders, and we could understand some issues. We need to have the single understanding of the reforms that are happening. We've discussed the trends, the reforms, the market needs. The representative of our chamber, they were telling about the upcoming copper crisis, to the necessity to find new mines, and in perspective of the annual crisis, up to 5 million tons of metal. The existing copper projects can cover this necessity around the world, but the question is not about the deficiency of the ore, of the metal itself, but the deficiency of the jurisdiction where we will be able to set this business. The negative image of the subsoil user, it just all over the world. All the events that were happening in Toronto, around the world, and even in Kazakhstan we have it. This information wars that form the community's opinion. It matters for the world organizations, and it is in Kazakhstan already. The members of the chamber are here today, and I think they will cover this topic further on. Getting back to my presentation, I wanted to emphasize that the support of the government traditionally is the foundation to create the essential investment environment. So the representatives of the Profile Ministry are not here today, unfortunately, but don't be afraid. I think the last message and the other aspects that have the budget funding all these events, not to participate in those, so that is why we don't have this full dialogue. Probably that is the explanation, but we will continue it anyway. I want to mention that in Kazakhstan we had great reform, and we should not forget where we are from and why we're doing this. Why did we decide to create this climate and environment? The majority of the experts that are here today, you heard about this. I'm not going to dive too deep into this, but for that period of time, partially the investors that were considering 140,000 square kilometers in GPE, and the volume of investment was not more than 25 billion tenge, and the junior companies were not there as a layer. So the experience that we had of the Soviet geologists, it was exhausting, and for the beginning of the stage of these reforms, these mines were contracted, and there were no new large explorations and discoveries, and unfortunately we did not even expect this. So the Acton system was not functional. Another aspect which was quite significant to have the investment reform that had the best practices. I show this picture on purpose because, in fact, that was the foundation that we were showing, which ecosystem we want to create by means of reforming the regulations, the legal rules of the game. Yes, we did have the geological survey, geoscience data. We had 5,000 places and mines which were on the balance. Of course, it was attractive for the investors and for the juniors too, in order to start the work in this country. Of course, the rules were understandable. It was important, the stability of the legislation, which was declared in the code, it really helped to create such a foundation. Yes, there was some skepticism. After the code was accepted, we did not have the result right away. So it was happening step by step. We have experienced the limitations provided by the COVID, then the consequences of the pandemic. And unfortunately, we have not started the National Bank project of the database that was supposed to digitalize all the interactions of the subsoil user and the government. Then we were worrying and experiencing that it was the ministry going to the geological authorities and back, so, and etc. The main focus finally was changed. The reform happened. Briefly saying that the vision of the chamber that we've created was the following. So, about mission, vision, and values is to keep this trend, to keep this climate and environment, to improve it, to strengthen it, and to help moving in this direction. Thanks to these efforts, as was mentioned by other speakers, more than 2,000 and a half new licenses appeared. The new investors have entered country, which had great capitalization, and it was more than 100 billion tenge, the capitalization of Rio Tinto and Fortescue and others. We are talking about the reform that really happened, and we were following that direction. We were relying on this. And the accent, the focus of my speech, I would like to draw to the results that we have obtained during the discussion at our conference that can have the impact on the investment environment. We have some certain initiatives and intentions that are being discussed by the government and by the parliament. We have some wonderful amendments being considered, all the regulatory issues when it comes to the competent authority and investor. It simplifies. We base and rely on the digitalization and exclude the human factor. But at the same time, we see the risks of worsening of this climate. The first block of such questions. I'm a little bit behind the presentation. Okay, so this is about the legal initiatives that were accepted. The expert of the mineral resources, which was banned, and yes, we understand their visions. Let's don't worry, all the specialists in GPE, that's not a problem. So then it will happen, the results will happen and will be obvious only in 10-15 years. These materials will be written in the regulatory documents, but we understand that the people change, the forms are changing, the legal acts are being changed too, and we have the risks that these bans will be circulated for all the mineral resources. As Nicola Vladimirovich has mentioned, we'll see how it's going to work. But then to change the rules, it's not really the correct approach. What bothers is about the programs for the exploration. Investors spends a lot of money, and it's not really correct that government dictates how to spend this money. We worry about keeping the standard of the reporting of the GP. Yes, okay, the acting company should work, but this acting licenses, conceptually, we were thinking that it should proceed to the world standards, and the lawyer said it will be distributed on all the participants, and we are really concerned too regarding the questions that are initiated to improve the investment climate. Yes, to improve the investment climate, the new foundation is being initiated to get the license off and to recall it off, and then the internal country values, or basically moving these aspects. These factors cannot rely and can be influenced by the subsoil users. That is the idea of radar approach, actually. So then about the agreements which didn't work, the volumes of investment, $50 billion. So I didn't see such agreements, and they offer to increase it 10 times more, $500 billion. And we think it is absolutely not a right approach, and we need to stimulate to process the deeper horizons, and constructing the mine, it requires the capital investment and it requires the state support. And another block, which is even more important, is the consecutive reforms and explanation of the interpretation of the act and legislation. And when it comes to the auction to all those mines that were in reserves and had the balance of the MMC, yes, we do trust to the work of our geologists, and my parents were the geologists. They were providing these reports, and the world configuration has changed, and the approach should change too, and it must be taken to the auction. The sensitive question is the policy on contracts when we have the negotiations.
Companies are facing the competent authorities that contract cannot be actually the ones that are worsening their conditions, and they are interpreted on its own accord or by the parties as they wish to interpret. But the main important thing is that every single company who has the contract, they have to fulfill all of their liabilities and responsibilities due to the tender conditions. And government is always benefiting from all of it. Here we need to take into consideration all of the factors so that these rules of the game were mutually beneficial or beneficial for all of the stakeholders. And now we are financing, for example, the works for restoration, and we are mitigating all of the events of natural disaster. In this case, we are thinking, do we need to protect this? Yes, of course, but we need to give some explanations. I think I'm already out of time. Thank you so much for your attention. If you will have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. Thank you so much. Ruslan Murachevich, thank you so much for interesting presentations and very interesting examples from the practice, especially with the regulative practices, especially for the last years. And myself thinking to continue. We have a huge block of questions, so I think we have some time to have 10-15 minutes of Q&A session. And now I would like to give the floor to Bakht Amangildievich Cherchikbayev, the chair of the board, Tauken Samruk, which is the national mining company. He would like to present the news on the combining several companies with the foreign investors. Good morning, dear participants of this forum. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude for this opportunity to participate and for the presentation on this session. So briefly on the national mining company Tauken Samruk, we are national company Tauken Samruk. After the merge of the assets with Kazgeology, Tauken Samruk is national mining company and strategic partner. Tauken Samruk is aimed at developing projects with strategic partners, leading vertically integrated mining and metals company in Kazakhstan with a diversified portfolio of assets committed to ESG principles. And we have investment projects, as we call brownfield projects, that are on the stages of the construction. And third is the production assets, especially we have acting assets which are 30% that we have shares in Kazakh, and we also have here a Finnish company, Tauken Altan. Further, dear participants, besides all of the projects that we have stated in the previous slide, we would like to also talk about project on the geology survey projects of Kaz Geology. Last year, we have finalized the process of the transfer of the 100% package of the shares of joint stock company Geology Survey Kaz Geology. And first of all, we have conducted following steps in order to optimize all of the processes of the management, expenditures, costs on both of the companies, and excluding the duplication of some of the operations, because two national companies had similar activities. That is why we have combined the functions that are directed towards the geological surveys and exploration. So that is why we have in our portfolio 40 geological projects, and Rio Tilto, Renderin, Kazakh Mus, Zinc. And after combining and merging those functions, on the next slide you could see the reflection on the portfolio of the assets, which is the 53 projects with more than 15 partners and participants. We are jointly working. So here we could state that we are one-stop shop for the investors in the geological industry, for the geological projects, and we see that we could be quite a company that it will simplify some of the procedures of the, because we are in a quasi-government company, and we could be GR partner who will be solving the functions on the level of the government bodies and authoritative bodies. And we think that these transformation will only strengthen the functions of the quasi-government sector in the geological exploration, and we will emphasize the geological exploration. And nowadays our geological survey is conducting the work of searching new perspective directions and fields, and we have identified some of the fields and sites that we already identified, and we are developing new works on the working with partners. And the brownfield projects that I've already mentioned, Shalkia Zinc, for example, and Alaigar, which is the silver manufacturing, processing, and extracting and processing project. And these projects are also included into the list of the privatization. So that is why we are negotiating with a number of foreign investors. We are conducting negotiations with the several foreign companies. I've already said that we are open for the work with the senior companies, and we are quite active, and we are already conducting a work with companies like DVK. I forgot the name of this company. I bring my apologies. So with active projects, I could say that we have interesting projects, which is the joint venture laboratory with Australian Laboratory Services, ALS Geochemistry. It's in Karaganda, based in Karaganda, and we are going to expand the works in this laboratory, covering the services for other companies, especially for the branches of Tauken Samruk, in order to have apply the opportunities of this kind of big laboratory. We're also actively working in the R&D in expanding the number of the products, especially processing catalysts and developing the jewelry sector. And quite an interesting news that I wanted to share in Tauken Altan. After all of the R&Ds, we have launched the processing of our earth minerals, and we have, I could say, almost zero waste. We have now in the earth minerals. I tried to be brief. My presentation is over, and right now in the slide you could see my contact details and the employees of the companies that you could contact regarding the investment projects or maybe any implementation projects. If you have any questions, I'm ready to answer. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you so much for your presentation. If you have any questions, I have a question. The question to Mr. Chijikbayev. Unfortunately, speaker has an echo in his microphone. So I would like to know some information about Project Shalkia. What prices, for example, is negotiated in projects on saffron and the north part of Kazakhstan, and what kind of works are done? Daniel, thank you so much for this question. These issues, a number of other questions, they are quite overlapping with the written request that you have already sent today, or tomorrow you will get the answers. And Wolfram, for example, project in the Kapar and the Khairate, for example, we have at the end of the March got the expertise, and with the Atorum we have already sent all of the information to the partners which we have signed the NDA with. So here we're going to wait for an implementation. So we will implement through the rules of the privatization of the projects on Shalkia. I would like to say that the present project is financed from the European EBRD, by EBRD, and the works are done, and it was started, the works had started. We are on the stage of the supply of the technological equipment on the side of the negotiations with partners, those who are ready to participate for the procurement of the control package of the 51 up to 100% of the package of the shares we are ready to sell, but this is premature to say that who is going to be our co-founder or co-partner. What you're interested in again? As you remember, they had to return to the government fund. And I would like to know what works are done on the supply, for example, or the... Thank you. In the Timur Stepuk, I cannot give you any comments because as far as I know, there are a number of the litigations, and I don't want to be involved into this process, to be honest. Question. You have another question, right? Good afternoon. Interpretation is not possible. The microphone is not going to the interpretation headsets. The microphone is not connected to the interpretation headsets. Interpreters cannot hear anything. If I understood correctly, if I heard it correctly, so regarding the beginning of the mining works for the plant, we are planning in October of this year start extracting, and next year we will have 2.2 million tons of the extractors. Nowadays, we are going to construct our own factory. We are considering the tolling right now, and we are finalizing all our negotiations on the processing on other factors. I cannot name. Once we will make the closure of the contracts, I can elaborate on that. You were talking about Kentao technology. This factory physically doesn't exist. I cannot elaborate on that. Thank you for your question.
The microphone is not working again. The question cannot be heard. Nicola, maybe you will touch this question. I think you've touched this issue. Yes, dear colleagues, the situation in the country is very complicated, especially now. When we are talking about the state regulation on prices on the energy coal. And we think that it is absolutely too fast to think about it, and the decision is too fast, too early to talk about it, because in Kazakhstan we have about 120 coal mine sites, and about 30 out of those are active. A very tight competition. In coal industry, we have the problems with coal export. The price at external markets went down, and very actively in our organization, in our Association of Mining and Metallurgical Enterprises, to have the coal forum. It will be in June, where we will consider the problems. We need to set up new approaches on coal processing to develop the coal chemistry, to develop the clusters. And we see that it would be important in coal industry, especially, to have clear perspectives of the development. So the coal specialists, they have some certain forecasts per year that the ministry provides. But what will happen in a long-term perspective in 10 years about gasification issues and where we will need the coal for burning, basically, it's not clear yet. But nevertheless, at least it was announced that 3 energy blocks are being constructed using coal. So there will be the necessity of having this coal. The question is set for the ministry to have the strategy of coal industry development, special coal industry, because large companies really need understanding of the perspectives. How much can they produce and provide for exports, for domestic market? These are main main questions. We are really waiting for you at our coal forum, and even if I may, we can announce where and when it will happen about the coal forum. What is the date? On the 7th of June. We're waiting for you there. All the coal specialists will be there. The representatives of the ministries are going to be there. Thank you. And I also wanted to draw your attention to all delegates of the forum. You see QR that is on the screen. Please, you scan it and vote. We have certain questions. I can read them out loud, but you will be able to see it according to the link that you get. How do you assess and evaluate the perspectives of the Ministry of National Economy that the growth of the mining industry in 2024, this year, it will be 4.7%? And the second question on the assessment of the perspectives of increase and decreasing of the growth in some other sectors. And here we can see the coal extraction, for instance, that we were talking about, lithium, uranium, and etc., all the copper ores and the critical minerals, as well as the hot topic that was mentioned. Then the question regarding the factors that have the most positive impact on the development of the mining industry in Kazakhstan, and other factors that have the negative impact. And the last question, when it comes to the growth of the domestic enterprises and facilities, processing factories. So these answers in 9 minutes will help us to understand what is the position of this sector of the industry regarding these 6 very sensitive issues. So far, while you're voting, reading, my question is to all speakers. Nikolai Vladimirovich and Ruslan Rashid, I wanted to ask you, this year, we had this final transit, and we have become from this risk, and we have become the family of CRIRSCO, this Committee for Mineral Reserves and International Reporting Standards. What's the position of the facilities of enterprises, of the association that you are the head of, regarding this transit from the mineral extraction tax to royalties? We were discussing the concept. So I think what is interesting for the investors, when we will get to royalties finally, and how? We were discussing this question many times, and the majority of the members of AMME, they tend to have the understanding to the rates of royalties. We want these rates to be offered in accordance to the international experience, and we should consider the direct market as too far away from the sea, from ocean, and we need to transport a lot. So just to take some rates from other countries that have the sea access, I think it's not really correct. We need to understand that this transit from this mineral extraction tax to royalty, it should be voluntary, because this approach would be absolutely important to be implemented to the further improvement and development of AMME. The majority, they have long-term development. They are credited to this models, and if we change something in taxation, very extraordinary, then the problems will appear. With some projects are being paid back during 10 years and more, so it's very time-consuming. So when it comes to the royalties, we should proceed step by step in the government. We understand that between the economical bloc, the Ministry of Economy and Ministry of Finance, we have the discussions, and they still cannot come to the consensus. They cannot find the common basis. Should we transfer to royalties or not? We think that yes, we should, at least to start the discussion of some certain approaches to some certain minerals regarding the rates. And I think it would be very important. We need to understand that the reform that we've started, it has eventually a very essential step to transfer to royalty. Without it, the reform will be not finalized. I would like to add, I agree for the active enterprises that are the main taxpayers and they form the basis in the country. Of course, this question is up to date. And when it comes to some rough steps, which should not be there, all this consecutive step-by-step voluntarily transfer with some estimates, it will be there. I think we will absolutely get there. But when it comes to the members of the chamber that I represent, these are the geological and prospective exploration specialists. They don't have it. They don't have this tax foundation. And we were talking about it, that there's fair rules of the game. They provide the fair rules and then the taxation, and the investor should plan how he will realize these projects and what he will do. Not that the rates should change, not that we should have some banning norms. It must be stimulating. If the dip of the changes and the participation is different, it should be different. I support Nikolai Vladimir's that reform will be finalized when we'll have this precise and clear rules. So those projects that so far the government does not see, it will be added to the balance based on their economical reason, if it takes place. And royalty, I suppose, will help also this the last increase in a mineral extraction task. It increases ore bodies that it was maybe more beneficial to work with this tax. It stopped being profitable. So simply speaking, in simple words, that where these pits were not destroyed or nobody will work on this because enterprise will be closed and we will have lots of technogenic mineral formations left and residuals, and these perspectives of processing of the technogenic mineral formations and its attractiveness of this issue in Kazakhstan, big problem, lots of discussion. So what is the concept? Any vision or preliminary understanding between the association that you are the head of and the government, how we can resolve this problem? So actually these problems were announced to the new prime minister, who is the ministry, to the vice minister, who is who was a part of the negotiations. We need to solve three questions. First, political. We have a certain TMF that the enterprises wanted to take the ownership, and if they do want now, then we should give it to them, because at the territory of some sort of storage, we have the state TMF, and on top it's private TMF. That's confusing, and nobody can understand what to do next. That's number one. Number two, if TMF is being processed, then the rate should be zero when it comes to the mineral extraction tax, because it's already paid. And that is something that we cannot compare with the raw materials. No way. And we found the understanding with the Ministry of Economy, and it seems like we're about to find it with the Ministry of Finances, but they're afraid that we will not manage the clear reporting and accounting on this issue. But when it comes to some certain objects, we show that it's not just possible, but it's already working, that we will not take just good ores and we will consider it as TMF, and it's even impossible in different places. But I really hope that this question will be solved. And question number three, the key one, ecological payments. I think whenever we have any locations, movements, we need to consider this waste issue. There's too much waste in the country that really pollute everything. It goes up into the air. We need to create some kind of unprecedented stimuli that this waste will be used maybe in road construction, railway construction. And when it comes to the economical payments, we need to consider and design the simplified approach, how to move them to the another place if it's not toxic, and if the toxic aspect is not increased. We need to have this complex, comprehensive approach, Ministry of Economy, Ministry of Finance, and economical bloc. I think during 2-3 months, we'll be able to solve this question. We have understanding. Thank you so much. I believe maybe at the end of this year, MINEX Eurasia, or in April next year, we will be able to see some results. and some initiatives at the legislation level. Please, let's see the screen, the results of the voting, the results of the questionnaire regarding the assessment of the perspectives and regarding the forecast of the Ministry of National Economy. The majority of us think that this forecast is too optimistic. 40% think that this forecast is rather realistic. The next question about assessment of the perspectives of increasing, decreasing of the growth in some certain sectors of the economy. And again, we see that gold extraction is maybe because of the presentation that this global demand is going up. Uranium, yes, good growing sector. We see lots of news from Mongolia and Uzbekistan. And everything above mentioned, that was unanimously the most perspective. The next question was regarding the factors that have the positive impact. And here, I think unanimously we have the same opinion by means of stimulating and decreasing the taxes, reducing some taxes, some flexible rates, which can stimulate, and we can have the positive impact on the mining industry in Kazakhstan. That's truly so. And then the next question on the negative impacts on the development tax increasing. That's truly so. There's change with mineral extraction tax. We really see its cut-off grade, and it increased, and we started extracting the ore less and produce the metal less. And it was interesting when we had the debates. It would be quite interesting to compare when it comes to this tax 7.5, and that was and comparing with another one that was 5, and we can see compare about the tax foundation if it was increased or decreased, and then we would be able to provide the analysis in which extent it is efficiency of having this mineral extraction tax. And the last two questions when it comes to the way of influence on this mining sector, the measures devoted to the growth of domestic enterprises of the processing industry by means of the artificial reduction of the prices. And I see the most popular answer about the reduction of the investment. And here again, what we see is that it's not that the investors don't want, it's just because there should be the freedom of choice and the freedom of entrepreneurship.
And regulation by the methods of the selection rather than administration. The next one is we're still awaiting answers. So on the last question, there are no opinions. Maybe we will transfer to the MINEX Forum 2025. I would like to express gratitude to our speakers of the first plenary session and delegates. Now